Hello and welcome to Innovation Culture Coding Live. Welcome to another session where we look into deconstructing a fiction case and looking into how my guest will solve that case. And it's all about making independent coaches and consultants who are working with innovation visible and through authenticity, through their stories, through how they are solving these cases. I hope that you, if you're the dream client, if you are interested in working with them, that you find them inside the show environment. And of course, in the best case, you will hire them and you work with them going forward. Help them and help yourself to solve the cases. So, my name is Jens Heitland. I'm your host. And if you're interested to learn more about that show, let me just quickly bring up this banner. Go to heitlandinnovation.com/innovation culture coding. You will find all details about the guest, the video recording, different clips, the audio version later on, and a lot of other things around the other coaches and consultants who are on the show. But today is not about other, it's all about my guest. And my guest today is Pim. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's getting a little bit dark here, but I think I've set up the light in just the right way.
It's perfect. So, before we go into the case and into deconstructing us, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what are you doing?
Who am I? It's always a hard question as I don't necessarily like boxes. But I'm stacking boxes on top of each other. So I'm schooled and trained as an architect here in the Netherlands. And after my architecture, I got fascinated with the experience economy. And I thought that buildings were still sort of on the parts of a product.
Mm.
And I thought, well, if I want to learn more about the experience economy, I need to go into a stage that is higher, so in experiences or even transformative experiences. And therefore, I co-founded a company called Sherlocked Mystery Experiences that is mostly known for their escape rooms. However, we've also done a lot of marketing activations or trying to create a story for a very complex future through gamification and play.
Yeah.
And after that, I went to San Francisco, did almost a year and a half research into curiosity, how to experientially create that experience of being curious, together with one of your other guests, Anthony Rocco.
Yes.
And we're now a threesome or a threple, or, we have a third partner there as well, Monica. And with the three of us, we host master classes into training your curious muscle. So that's a little bit about me.
In a nutshell.
in a nutshell, yeah. I could tell a lot more, but I don't think that's why I'm here today.
We will get to that, hopefully, inside the case. So, for everyone who is watching this live, please shoot us a comment inside the chat from where you're watching and where you are in general, which country, which city. We are always eager to know. I see there are already a couple of people watching, so it's always good to see where you are. And if you have questions to Pim or to myself, please shoot them as well into the comments. Then we bring them up throughout and try to answer them as much as we can. But let's get into the case. So you and I have selected a company to work on today, and the company is called Disney. I'm not sure if the listeners or people watching this know that company, but I hope at least like two or three know that company. So it's Disney. Disney has a challenge, and the challenge is that what we have all seen and experienced the last 2 years, almost 2 years, is that there will be more events like the pandemic we have right now, which are forcing companies to change, which are not just the company itself as well, everything around the company can be changed literally within a couple of months if you take the pandemic as an example. So there will be most probably more examples like this, and climate change is one of the big drivers of that and other topics as well. So Disney has seen that and is seeing that, and they want to look ahead. Disney want to be resilient. I'm managing to speak that word. Hey. So they want to be resilient for the future and really looking into how can they build a resilient muscle in being future fit and being ready for everything that's coming ahead, and looking into how can we build that muscle inside the organization and then using it as well for all their products and so on. So they're hiring Pim and helping supporting them to figure that out. So that's the case we will be exploring. So it's all about Disney, and it's all about how you build this resilient muscle. So, Pim, how are you solving that? How do you work with them? How do you work with Disney?
I mean, yeah, this is first off, I would be honored and a little scared to solve this case. And I think that's maybe how I would start, with saying that this is, Disney is really well in telling stories. And I think the collaboration in such a case is also a story, or even a journey that you embark together, where both of us actually don't know where we're going to end up. And I think this is a big part of both the question of the case, but also in the collaboration, where we're embarking on that journey or a process that we don't really know where the end is. So it also means that it's hard for me to exactly explain what the steps are going to be like. And often the question is, well, what's the goal and what's the exact process? And we can, get our toolbox and show all the tools that we have. But I think that sort of the acknowledgement of embracing that unknown together and having a lot of trust in that is going to be immensely important. And I think the first question that I would ask or sort of acknowledge is, what is kind of the experience that we want to have together as a group solving this case? How do we show up?
I love that, because it's so different than a lot of other consultants and coaches. Do you call yourself consultant or coach or something you don't want to be in? Yeah, I get it.
It's hard. I mean, the clients that I've had tried to define it, but it's sort of, they said, well, there's a combination of like a personal coach and a business consultant, but also a creative that actually knows a lot around like brand and creativity and design processes. So there's like these three pillars that I can lean into or lean out of. And I think that they specifically sort of the personal side and the business side, I think they go hand in hand, because often the things that we are experiencing at work is also coming from us as individuals.
Absolutely.
More and more when you are one of the co-founders or on a higher level.
Yeah. What I like about that, because if you, and I always joke about that, maybe not too much on this show, but today I will. If you take the big consultants, like the big companies, everyone knows, with a couple of letters only, most of them, they would never talk about, so what is the experience we would like to have with each other? So for them, it's always, okay, this is the goal and this is what's costing. It's less about, or they talk directly process rather than, hey, let's think about what an experience is. So how would you do that? Let's say you're meeting them first time and you're getting into that. Would you do that in a workshop style? How would you start even talking about the experience?
Well, it depends on the client and the relationship, I would say. In this case, we say it's Disney. Um, yeah, I think that what I would really love is actually for us to get together, but not on the company side.
Yeah.
So I think that I would send a handwritten letter to those that are invited, and invite them on whatever journey that we're going on to, which is at a secret location. And on this location, I think they would find an outfit, and the outfit is then selected for them specifically. So they change sort of character, and while changing character, they enter the space that we're going to be in, where we sort of set out this set of questions of, well, if this is going to be the start of our experience, how do we want it to continue? What are the moments that we are going to create? Is it going to be in person? Is it going to be at the office, or are we going to set up like smaller sprints? How much personal development do we want to do? So I think the way that we set the first contact is also setting, it's almost like if we go into the storytelling that Disney does, it's setting the stage for where we're going to. Because the moment that we start talking about it is the moment that we actually have to convince more than experience.
Yeah.
Right? So you're setting up this podcast show with like beautiful lighting, and we talked about, well, maybe it's Disney, so I thought, okay, maybe I need to get a cape on. So there's sort of like, where do we invite someone into? What are we wearing? What is the language that we use? What are they wearing? So I think an important part is, how do we get you out of the context that you're in? Because the context itself has such an environment and such behaviors that it's sometimes harder to go beyond that in a way. And I know specifically for companies like Disney or Pixar, they have their rooms that they call their creative rooms or their story rooms. So they have meetings in those rooms only for creative brainstorming. So the fun part is that they actually know the power of creating an environment that is completely different than a boardroom meeting where you talk about the numbers for next year. So I think that would be something to set the stage of how do we want to create this journey. And even though I'm hired as blank, I'm just merely the guide that is having an immense amount of tools, but we're doing it in a way, we're doing it together. And I think that's an important part of me not joining that space and being like, well, we have to do this tool and this is the way to get there. Because of course we can do that. And, larger consultants are very equipped to do so. But I think the design of this space, the way that we sit, are we facing each other? Are we not seeing each other? Maybe we're back to back. We're just hearing each other. And even though for me, these are like very simple experiential tricks, they work really well in corporate settings or even in smaller settings of like just changing how we have a meeting. And I think that's, I guess, part of my architectural and design background is thinking about the environmental or spatial experience in which we have a conversation and in which we maybe solve the case.
I was just thinking, if you have a client like Disney, they might be way more into that than other companies, like you said. I was just imagining, like, holy crap, how would that work with a bank and what would be the impact for the people who are joining that experience. I think the impact will be always huge because I've been part of experiences like that as well. Um, but I think the impact for corporations that is not at all used to this ways of thinking and exposing themselves to experiences is must be incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it might be easy for Disney. I don't know if easy is the right word, but I think in companies that this sounds more adventurous for, um, I would say we all love to go to the movies. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter, I think, where you work or what kind of background you have. So it's sort of like a general thing that we like. And therefore, if a company that is more traditional or you have some resistance, um, I think it's you can always find uh, someone that's your ally within the company,
Hmm.
and I think that finding those connections and relationships that will actually help you go into that space together is something that works really well, because you can have naysayers or people that are like, oh, I don't want to do this. But eventually, if you find that the majority is into it, then you can also convince those that are maybe a little bit hesitant
Hmm.
because it's unfamiliar, not because they don't like it. Because I think there's a, like, the resistance comes from a very long standing culture that whatever is happening isn't allowed or is strange or isn't worthwhile. um, and and more often than not, I'm specifically with working in teams, I focus a lot on the relationship.
Yeah.
And uh, often we're like, oh, but that's not efficient. Like, we let's get things done, let's move through the agenda. And that's of course also true, but I'm always curious or surprised that if we focus on the relationship specifically at the beginning of a project, then that will eventually give us so much more time because we can work well together, or we know our flaws because we're all deeply flawed and we all need our quirky compliments, or can be, I don't know, sad or tired. And I just started a project where I mentioned to all my colleagues, is like, well, I thrive if I get compliments. I know it's silly, but just after this meeting, tell me that I run this meeting really well, and I'll be the best colleague ever. Just, it's easy. Um, yeah, and I think setting that stage of a little bit of vulnerability, but also making fun of your own flaws, and knowing that from each other, um, will be more infinite and more lasting.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think that's, at least in my experience, coming from the corporate world, that's not, let's say it in a nice way. Uh, companies are not investing into that too much. Some do, I know, but some are more about, hey, it's like you said, it's about efficiency. We need to get things done. We're not here to have fun. We're here to get like the business moving.
True, and I think it's it's a shame that it's seen as fun, because I don't see it as part of the fun connection and relationship,
Huh,
because
huh.
that's something different. I see it as, hey, what are ways in which we can efficiently work together and build a relationship? Because working is relational, and I just really need to know in what way I can best work with you.
Yeah.
Um, and what happens if, I don't know, I say the wrong thing to you, or what happens if I look over your shoulder? Do I need to let go and leave you with a task and then have you come back? And or do I need to, like, hold your hand? There's like different types of working and learning.
Yeah.
And if we all know that from each other, then we can be a lot more efficient.
Absolutely. So going back, so
Yeah, we
you're
drifted away from Disney.
let's get back to Disney. So you talk about what is the experience you would like to have with the team that's going to work with you, and looking into how do we build this resilience muscle. In the end of this live stream, I will be able to say resilience without stutter. So so the team goes into depth, getting to know each other, building relationships with each other, and as well with you, because you're an integral part of that. What is the next step? What is the next exploration you will be doing with them?
Yeah, I think as the question is a lot around, okay, we're facing a future that is unknown,
Hmm.
and the future is always unknown, but we've now realized that a pandemic or maybe a climate change has such a dramatic impact that we need to be more and more, even more focusing on our resilience than we needed before. So I think it's the acknowledgement of we need to train a muscle that can embrace the unknown better than anything else.
Hmm.
And the funny part about that is that, of course, curiosity is the one thing that when we follow that, it doesn't know where you will end up. And I think an integral part of curiosity is that we seek to do or to train it in a way. So we're seeking to train it day by day, which definitely means like how do we show up, and what are the things that we're doing that make us resilient, make us okay with not knowing where to go.
Hmm.
So it's a refocus or a reframing from being very much goal oriented. This is the vision. This is where we're going to. This is how we want to show up, and this is what we want to build
Hmm.
and continue to build, and will most likely have a result, and that result can be something that we might previously called a goal or a vision, but it can also be something completely different. And I think the best example that I can give is we're currently working on a book, and when you're writing a book, the goal is to write the book and to have the book finished.
Hmm.
But how do we get this book to be finished is to have a writing practice.
Yeah.
And if I don't have a writing practice, then there's not going to be any book. However, if I can be focused on, well, what is my best writing practice? What do I need in order to write well, to write creative, to have enough energy, enough confidence, enough focus to write? And if I cultivate that writing practice, then that means I'm going to produce a lot of words. And that eventually will result in a book. But if that writing practice is cultivated in such way, then it can result in 100 books. Whereas if I would focus on the goal, I would continuously think that I'm on a deadline, I have to produce something, and I'm just very stressed that I need to write a book. And I think that's it's a very different focus area, and you're focused on principles and practices rather than goals.
Yeah. I like that. I was just writing down mindset, but it's not mindset. Mindset might be a tiny part of that, but it's more than mindset. So it's this practice is not really mindset, because mindset is, yeah, I need to do it every day, and I might enjoy it even. But I think this practice part is a good example, which gets deeper than just the mindset. So it's like habits and so on.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I know the show title is, I think it's a finite and infinite innovation.
Huh.
And it's coming from this book, Finite and Infinite Games, from James Cars, that explains that there are two types of games. One is the finite game that has an end goal and a winner. And then there's an infinite game that doesn't have an end goal, but players are in the game to keep on playing. And I think the relations that we can make from that book, and also from, looking at it from a game perspective, as, that's part of my background, is we see the shift from goal-oriented to being sustainable, or even we're talking about regenerative products, regenerative businesses. And I think that's the relation between a finite and an infinite game. An infinite game is, and I know that I'm repeating, is someone is playing to continue the play. So it's more focused on how do we play and how can we keep on playing, rather than what is my best strategy to win this game.
Yeah.
Because I think the question is, well, what if you won? What happens next?
It's like being in the moment and you enjoy it, rather than I'm focusing in doing this to get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I speak a lot. Sorry for interrupting. I speak
No,
a lot
go.
about that. I mean, I have started this podcast as an example, with a clear goal. Like, I'm German, clear goal in mind. I'm coming from a business perspective and I want to do this. But over time, I ventured myself into a journey which is like, I'm just enjoying the journey so much, doing this different show activities and meeting people like you and others, that I don't care about. I mean, of course I care about the goal, but it's not the reason I do it. The reason I do it, I get so much value and energy out of it that I want to keep it going. That's the only reason.
Yeah, and I think that the moment that you started, did you ever thought you were going to do these kinds of shows?
No.
Like, this show was not a goal of yours. I think
No.
it came from, oh, this is fun to do. Oh, wow, I like showing up this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you go from the experience, then you look together with them is how they need to learn to unlock this muscle. So this, and through curiosity you mentioned. But what I'm really interested is, how do you take them into that space? So how do you get them from, okay, we understand that the future is unknown and there will be uncertainty. How do you get them into space to not getting into the mindset, but getting into the practice part of, we need to show up in a different way to be able to allow this to happen?
Yeah, I think there's different stages, and let me unpack an example with climate change. With climate change, we all are very much focused on solving the problem, and we come up with amazing solutions. Like, they're incredible. I believe that the biggest issue at the moment with climate change is that we are not in the experiential state of that we feel the urgency as a collective. So we're missing a step, and we're focused on the solutions, and we're great at doing those solutions. But the experiential part of, wait a minute, in 20 years from now, the world is looking very, very different. And if we can feel that in our bodies, and then we would act very different. And it's and I'm not saying that is like it's easy, because it's the hardest part. And research has shown that if we look at ourselves in 10 years, it's similar at thinking about a stranger on the street. So we need to find that bridge, and I think that experience is that bridge. And so going back to Disney is, we need to go through some experiences together that we're like, oh, what happens to me if I'm faced with these unknowns? And it doesn't even have to be so difficult. I mean, we could go to an escape room. We could get lost in the woods. We could solve a puzzle, right? We could play a game. And those elements we could use as examples and then plot them to like, well, what does that show up? And then once we've had the acknowledgement of everyone of like, oh, this is something we need to do. You're right. We do need to like figure out how to embrace the unknown more than before.
Yeah.
Then we need to set out a set of principles, I think. So what are the principles for Disney as a company that will help set this culture of constant resilience or constant innovation? So it's not only the team, whatever that team might be that we're working with, it's going to be transported to the whole company.
Yeah.
Because eventually it's a network that will be the resilient part of it, not the CEO level. Sorry, go.
I would like to double click or double down on on the resilient muscle. I will learn this word still. Now, you mentioned culture, which is always an interesting perspective for me, because in corporates, they're talking a lot about culture, and we need to find the right culture to be. But that's the hardest thing, because you said it. It's like the culture is. I always say the culture is the thing when the boss leaves the room, what the people are doing when the boss is not in the room. That's culture, or like little piece of it at least. So it's literally it's woven into the DNA of the company of how they are working with each other and reacting when a threat comes from the outside. So
Yeah.
it's like you reprogram their DNA, literally. Who is that?
Yeah, so in architecture, one joke that I have with a friend is, if you go into a bar or a cafe, you have to look at the toilet. And if the toilet is designed well and clean, then you know whether or not you're in a place that had both a good architect but also a good running company. Because the toilet is the last place that most people design, and also the toilet is the last place where a business, or in this case a cafe, will have set up their systems to clean it and maintain it and keep it fresh. So if the toilet is beautifully designed and it's like clean, you know that the back end of the business, wherever you are, there's something going well.
Yeah.
And this isn't like a golden rule, but it was more of a joke of like, did you go to the toilet? Oh yeah, this is kind of like, so it's almost like looking in a kitchen, but then in the back end. And similar to, a company, and if you want to see whatever their culture is, I would often talk to the people on the floor, and often like the doorman or someone that's at the desk. Like who do you talk most often to? Like who even asks you how your day is? Because it all trickles down. And I think the hardest part about culture is that there is no, or what I'm hearing is that there's no space for differentiation and sort of like a way to embody that culture on your own terms or in your own culture. So it's funny how we have a culture of our own in our background and the country that we're living in, and then there is a company culture, and it's tricky because those words are similar, but your personal culture is very different than a company culture.
Yeah.
And I think that this is why I'm a very big fan of principles and practices. Is, let's say a company's principle is to a principle of gifting. So as a company, we want to gift X amount to a good cause. Well, what are the practices? Well, then as a company wide, the company can gift a certain amount of money to whatever company. However, me as an employee, I don't I don't have any influence. So as a team, or maybe as a department, you have a choice of what you want to gift X amount to. And then as a team, you can also decide, well, what do you want to gift to? And it's even a smaller amount. And then me as an employee, I might get whatever, maybe it's time, maybe it's money, maybe it's something else that I can just gift myself to anything that I believe needs gifting. So in that way, there's like different levels of practicing the same principle, where I could with very much confidence say, well, our company's culture is gifting, and we all do it in very different ways. It shows up different, but I know that we're all doing it.
Yeah,
which is amazing. It's a gifting culture. So I think
I have never heard it in that way. Practicing the principles. I was just writing it down. I think that's a big trigger for an organization to change the culture, because sometimes, like in the company where I was working 12 years, there was always no method is better than the good example, which means the CEO was saying, I can't ask anyone in the whole business to pick up the trash while walking across the store if I'm not doing it myself.
That's right.
So that's literally similar to that. Is you need to practice this, and everyone inside the business needs to do it to be able to, like, you feel awkward if you're not doing it and people are around you. So that's then ingrained into the culture, into what you do, and that's literally practicing the principles someone or a team set out. So how do
I
you?
think it's also acknowledging the personalization of it.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the curve of the experience economy, where from goods to experiences, or to services to experiences to transformations, the thing that makes it go up is the personalization of it, and not the thing that makes it go down in the curve is the commoditization. So the practice of the principle allows for that personalization.
Yeah. So how do you do that on this topic? So we have just bringing everyone back on track. So we have Disney. They're understanding that the future is unknown, and there might be things like the pandemic or other things that will be a forced change scenario from the outside. So they're looking into building a resilient muscle, and hiring you to support them. So you take them into understanding, as a starting point, understanding what the experience is, working together, defining that, and exploring that. Then you go into relationships, how they want to work with each other. And then you look into understanding of unlocking this muscle. And then we went down into different stages where you say they need to experience it to be able to understand what it is and how they might be acting, and then building principles based on that and practices. I hope I managed to get that right.
It was quite the design journey already, I think, of like
Yeah. So how do you do that with the practices? How do you get them from experiencing it, building the principles, and then building that into the organization, that it's not happening with one team, that is happening with more than when one person or the team?
Yeah, I think it's important that so we already have defined the principles for Disney, that they're recognized as those principles, right? So this is already, I think, a huge amount of work to get even to the principles, which is partly mapping what is already part of the culture and how do we translate that into a principle, what is already working. So it's kind of like where we're now, and how do we even translate what we have into principles, which is the first translation. And then do we miss anything in these principles that will allow us to be more resilient in this specific area of a global pandemic or climate change? And then I think it's a lot around who are the storytellers and the leaders, the key figures that can find the connections and relationships in the company to start explaining what are these principles, and start asking the questions of, well, what does it mean to you? How would you practice this? So it's the finding that it's not common ground, but it's like the weight of the employees, or to have them carry the practices.
So,
and that's something that because they're always changing.
Yeah.
And therefore the system needs to be infinite to be able to make sure that whenever there are new people coming in, or whenever the environment is changing, or when this pandemic thing can happen, the practices change with the environment. So I think it's a lot around, well, we've done all this work. We've changed maybe even mission, vision, values to practices and principles. How do we tell this story within the company? How do we make sure that this is something that's going to be more alive? Maybe we even need to animate this in a certain way, right? So how do we use the power of the company itself to seep it as like a tea into the company?
And I guess that, I mean, if we take Disney as a case, that will be way easier with them, I'm pretty sure. Like, hi guys, let's do a brainstorm. How do we tell the story?
Could be.
Or it's even harder, maybe.
I'm like, more often it depends a little bit, but I think it would be that all the resources would be there. But there might be even more resistance. Who knows?
Yeah.
True. Like I don't want to make that assumption just based on the fact that it's a creative company.
Yeah.
Which is part of the practice of like, oh, there are so many assumptions that you and I can make, and then that assumption is going to focus you in a certain direction where maybe that actually there's more resistance because the assumption is that it's going to be easy.
So it's, if I understand you right, it's really enabling the whole organization to understand it through a story, and that can be told in different ways, in different formats, and different experiences. But in the end, it's a living thing, a living way of exploring it. So people who are coming in or going out literally influence it, but they take it on board and then personalize it for themselves.
Yeah, and I think the beautiful thing about Disney is that they as creators, they exactly know this very thing, how it works, because that's what they're making. This is they're the ones, as Dave also always mentions, our friend Dave. They're able to make a thought into a thing on paper, and that thought in a thing is like, it makes a circular motion, and slowly, the more and more we practice it, like it gets there. And I think it's very similar with this culture and this resilience is, even though the environment is changing, you're like, oh, so the spiral keeps on spiraling.
Yeah.
But if you make the line just go from one to another end, then you have to like do it again, and then do it again, and do it again. Um, so it's almost translating the work that you're doing into the work that you are being. Um,
That's a
which
great
maybe
one.
sounds very vague.
No, but I think it's important specifically for those that have never worked with experiences in general. Let's say I'm oversimplifying it, but let's take a bank. Of course, they work with experience, but they most probably don't think in experiences. Though that they might think about their customer and that they have a good time, but in the end, it's like it's a bank. And if we take very, very traditional ones, at least in my experience, is they it's hard to understand how an experience and looking into experiences and focusing and zooming into experiences can unleash a lot of potential in a business.
Yeah, and I have an example of working, or I know someone that works in the police force in the innovation there, where they were trying to convince one of the senior executives to become more experiential,
Hmm.
and they were facing resistance um, until in a moment they're like, okay, we're not going to have a boardroom meeting anymore. Whenever they get to the boardroom meeting, they find this map that has a location where they need to go.
Huh.
So they guided them to a location, and well, there was this whole like 2 or 3 touch points where they were sort of discovering something. And even though experientially this was super simple, wasn't much, like they didn't put a lot of money into it, but they were saying, well, this is kind of what we mean by when we want to make things more experiential. How was this experience for you? And I think a big part of it was also that they asked this executive to, I think their wife, to record a video or something. But the example is not necessarily about the example itself, but more about, well, if we want to explain what is this experiential, then we're in a realm that is hard to explain.
Yeah.
Even though we can talk about the models, we can talk about what happens in our brains. So there's a lot of science why it works. However, when you and I talk about love, it's so very different than when we are in love and when we are experiencing love. And that's what the experience economy, or people that identify as experiential coaches, or consultants that are focused on experience. And I just shout out to Aga of writing a book with so many great examples of how experience design translated into business. But we're in this niche field, and we're trying to explain things that are sometimes harder to explain, and therefore Disney is such a great example of like the first people that saw a train coming on a screen, they thought that they were seeing a real train, and yeah, in an essence, they understood what experience is, and therefore created Disneyland.
Yeah.
The hero's journey is all about you being part of that experience. You're like the central figure in a story, which on the other end is also a little problematic, that we need different stories than just the hero's journey. But they're successful, and they are generating a lot of money.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned one interesting point, which I would like to discuss, is every company is on a different level and willingness to explore this experience part. And I think it's more about getting started and doing little steps than not doing steps at all, and then finding it out for them, which then helps them to go into a direction. Specifically, if we take this example, to understand how it is to step into the unknown.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the scary part, or things that I find scary, is you have to invite someone with confidence into the experiential part. However, that can be in like many places on the scale. Sometimes the strategy is to make a fool of yourself, and therefore the first step is relatively easy and seems like not even a step. But it does require from some people to be like, oh, we're just gonna go all this way.
Yeah.
And not knowing that that's actually part of the strategy to make the first step in something experiential. Yeah.
So what did we miss on getting Disney towards unlocking that resilient muscle?
Yeah, maybe I think one thing that we maybe didn't miss, but I think is an interesting part, and I think it's something that I mentioned around like finite and infinite games, is we can learn a lot from games in a way. And not just from playing games, but the Sherlock, so the escape room company, whenever we would hire people, we would run them through an escape room. So we would have a very elaborate process of hiring, and then at the final moment, we would put them through the escape room. And every time I missed something and I saw in the escape, like in the room, how they work together, I was like, oh, I'm so glad that we did this, because I didn't notice in the procedures or in the like the interviews, and then even on they're also actors, so they show sort of like how well they can perform. And then in the game, you can see how they collaborate, what happens when they're under stress, how much they give room for others to bring up ideas. So in like, and it's almost like a condensed experience environment. You can see our own sort of habituation. So I think that one part is that we can learn a lot from observing adults at play, and therefore I think inviting play and playfulness is, on the one hand, learning to observe, oh, this is certain behavior, but also to learn that the work that we're doing can be very efficient in a playful way.
Yeah. And that's huge. I mean, I was just thinking, holy crap, you're trying to hire people, and then you put them into an escape room, and who comes out will be the winner. It's getting the job.
Sort of. I mean, there are no winners, because we just want to play along. They're just people that are playing a different game. So we're like, you can play there, and then we'll play with these.
I think a key point for that, and that's also why I've started this show, is the authenticity. Because specifically in the business world, we learn to play a role. If you're in, or let's say if you work in the corporate setting, you learn to play a role and fitting into the system, and that will make you successful inside of that company. If you're different, or in a lot of companies, at least I've seen it, if you don't play that role, if you're just yourself, then you will not have a possibility to grow in that company. So you learn to play that role. And I think that's something we as people and humans in the future need to unlock, at least in my opinion, to how do we get away from playing a role and trying to be someone who we are not, specifically in the business world, which will unlock a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think it's also recognizing that a part of that role is also us. So we're still authentic in our role, and we're playing that role because we entered a game that is partly finite. So I think the whole thing that I'm saying is not like, oh, you're doing it wrong, you have to be more authentic, you have to change your role. I'm like, we have to change the rules this finite game to make it more infinite. So we have to create principles, and therefore we have practices, and that allows you for playing an infinite game that is both on a personal health level so much better, that is both on like the regenerative future that we want to create so much better, that is also better for your resilience of your company, because you can change your practices, and everyone would be more willing and able to adjust, because that's already part of the DNA.
Yeah. Love it. We're full circle.
And also part of like this is there's so many ways in which we could have gone this conversation. We both didn't know where to go. I didn't know how we would solve this case. So this is also part of just us trying to show up and trying to figure out, well, what are elements that we need to think about.
Yeah, and that's why I want to create this environment as well, or design it in that way, because that you're explaining how you would do it inside of that construct of having this case and having this, let's say, this rules of this show. But I truly believe that if you're not a different person if you would do that with a company. So you're authentically show on how you would start in trying to figure out how to solve that problem, and that's hopefully will enable others to say, hey, I would love to work with Pim, and I really like how he's thinking about these things. Let's have a conversation with him. And that's really something I want to create, which is all about how do we solve the bigger problems we have in this world. It's not about, hey, how do we, yes, of course, getting Pim an interesting gig. That's of course part of it, but it's if you are able, let's say, if you take Disney and you have the possibility to work with Disney solving this, what power would you unleash with enabling Disney to do that, and what changes will they generate in the world? And that's for me really the interesting part. Imagine how big that can be, that impact of a small conversation we're having live on a screen right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And also like, even though Disney is a very large company, I think the spark can be just one person, and that person can spark. So I think that more often than not, we're again focused on like the bigger impact. And I think that if everyone on Earth would just spark 2 people, then how many sparks are we creating?
Yeah.
So I think it's also that, again, but maybe that's a practice that I'm trying to do myself. Is like, oh, who in my surroundings can I help, or can I support? And if we all do that just with 1 or 2 people, then the world would look very differently.
Absolutely.
To make it brother, what if we all had one really good night's rest?
Yeah.
How would the world look like?
Ask me. I have a little 4-year-old daughter.
Well, there you go. I've read a lot of research that explains the negative consequences of not sleeping.
Yeah.
I don't know, like maybe, and now I'm trying to solve the case again. Next time Disney would call me, I'm like, well, let's look at the sleeping patterns of everyone in Disney.
Yeah, well, that would be an interesting one.
So, which is why, of course, Calm now is so successful.
Yeah, let's get into the last part. Okay. I'm always asking as the last question, or last bigger question. Can you explain who your dream client is?
Well, I really like to work with people one-on-one. And more often than not, individuals that are feeling called whenever they hear me speak, or when they see something, they reach out, be like, hey, I don't exactly know what you can do for me, but I have a hunch that you could help me out. And I would say 1 in 4 cases that is true, because I always try to figure out what I can offer, both in time and capabilities, and what that person needs. So I'm not really explaining it well, but I'm sort of I think the ideal person is the one that actually follows their curiosity in that sense of reaching out and being like, I don't exactly know, but I think, and I think that's the start of a conversation. And these could be individuals that are already successful and have their own business and want to sort of grow, both in their design or even in their own leadership skills. And these could be individuals that are running multi-million companies, multi-million euro, billion. Sorry, I'm getting lost in the translation of dollar and euro. So successful individuals that are running big businesses, to people that are more known on the screen that are also reaching out. So it's kind of I often feel like a mysterious consultant, and I often also don't tell who are my clients.
Yeah. It's just a game. So I was writing down. It's like I would call you guide instead of coach or consultant.
I mean, it's guiding transformations, but yes, it's 100% true. It's also the thing that we name ourselves in the Stone Soup, which is that it's a co-created camp. There are guides that are helping each other to guide. Yeah.
Awesome, Pim. We made it.
Thank you for guiding us through this conversation, Jens.
Thank you for joining me on the journey. Was great. So for everyone who is watching this, you can go to, let me just put up the banner again, heitlandinnovation.com/innovation culture coding, where you will find this recording, 3 clips, audio versions of this, and of course show notes and a link towards Pim. So if you want to engage with Pim, if you believe you might be interested in being his dream client and engaging him in different ways, or if you are Disney or similar to Disney and want to engage with Pim, you're welcome to get to that webpage, click through, and say hello to Pim and get yourself introduced and get connected. That's it.
I would love to receive letters, but you'll have to ask me my address for it.
Yes, handwritten letters.
Which I've actually gotten, very surprisingly. I put it somewhere oh, I love handwritten letters. Then I got some, which was amazing, and I always write back. So that's awesome. My promise to whoever writes me.
Cool. So thanks, Pim. For everyone watching this today, tomorrow is already the next Innovation Culture Coding show, which I will be launching, at least promoting after this one. And then there's another one on Thursday. So this week, 3 times Innovation Culture Coding, always at 7 in the evening, European Central Time. Thank you very much.
Practice.
Yeah, I'm practicing and I'm in the moment because I love it.
You're doing amazing.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you. And everyone, see you next time, which is tomorrow.